All right, I'm Marilyn O'Hearn. I'm a master's certified coach. I had started coaching 20 years ago. This is my 20th year, and I still love it. And I partner with other coaches as a trainer, supervisor, and mentor, and then with leaders and their teams in organizations. And one of the things that we do is partner to unleash potential. So that is our topic for today, is breaking free from bias to unleash potential. And that is a topic that's close to my heart. So actually, my heart breaks from the explosive damage of bias to people and organizations. And as coaches, we want to unleash individual and organizational impact and income, including our own, right? Yet as much as we try to be judgment-free, neuroscience tells us that is impossible. We all have unconscious bias, even if we do not want to admit it. And that bias can result in client and business losses. So you may be surprised, even as much as you work interculturally, and I know you do in this Singapore chapter, how much you still have to learn. I wrote a book on this topic, and I've been working with coaches, leaders, and human resource professionals for years, and I'm still learning. So you can learn to identify and manage your own bias and partner with your clients to do the same, so all can live up to their full potential. And we will begin to do that in this webinar today with the first of 2 impact steps. And I can go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to be using a Prezi. I like the idea of showing that we're on a journey together. And I'm going to give you an example to start with of David. There we go. And let's see, I need to move the pictures. Well, maybe I can still see. We'll see.
Nope. I can still see you actually on your video. Yeah.
Okay. I can't see you though, and I can't see the chat.
Yeah,
I can only see this.
Yeah, I will handle the chat. Don't worry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. So take David, for example. In an initial coaching session, I asked David what his goals were, and he said he wanted to improve external relationships and negotiating skills. So I asked him to give me an example, and he said, I want to prove to them they are wrong. Well, as a coach, you're trained to see your clients as creative, resourceful, and whole. What is your reaction to David? Do we have any reactions, Jennifer?
Hi. Okay, yeah, thank you, Fanny. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that as soon as he says that, the other side is going to put a guard up, and it's not going to be a collaborative, respectful conversation. Too much judgment.
Yes. Yes. So, he wanted to improve relationships, but he also wanted to convince people that they were wrong. That doesn't really go together, does it? And I don't know about you, but when you hear that kind of a statement with that force, do you have any kind of internal reaction? So my internal reaction was, am I going to be able to coach this guy? Is he going to be coachable? And I don't know if you've ever wondered that. So that was an assumption that I was starting to make. Is he going to be coachable or not? Well, as we explored further, David, who was from Western Europe, was clearly frustrated by the indirectness of his South American colleagues' communication and wanted to get right to the solution. So, what do you hear David's bias against? Because a bias is something in favor of or against. So, what do you hear is his bias? Anyone?
Hi, it's Penny again. He's already decided that what he's going to do is to tell everyone that he's right and that he's not going to be listening to their sides or gathering any information from them. So he's just basically going to go in there and tell them that they have to do what he wants. And again, it sounds like he's had a lot of frustration in the past just by the tone in his words.
Yes, thank you, Penny. So his bias was against people who communicate indirectly. He was a direct communicator, and he thought unless someone communicated that way, that they were wrong. And so that was his bias. Well, we were able to look at how to manage his bias and assumptions toward his colleagues and his external partners, their communication and ideas. And he was then able to achieve his coaching goals, which supported his organization's vision. So he did become a hero. It was a success story. But if he had not been able to look at his assumptions or his bias had continued to get in the way, how successful do you think he would have been?
We have our colleagues, PJ mentions that proving himself right and other wrong in the chat group that is happening.
Okay, someone's saying that he sees himself as right and others wrong.
Yeah, yes.
So that's not usually a recipe for success, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And he mentioned he can be successful as much as he wants to be. That's what was written on the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. He can be successful if he learns to identify and manage his bias and his assumptions. Thank you. Okay. So we all have unconscious bias because that is the way our brains work, whether we like it or not. And we'll be learning more about that. I'm going to share a little video from Google with you. It can be frightening to consider how our biases can throw us off course and sabotage our own and our clients' successes. So that's part of what we're going to be looking at today. So our agenda, we're going to look at what is the big deal about bias, what is it, and how does it impact coaching, of course. We want to talk about that. And I've identified 6 bias impact steps. So the 6 steps use those letters. The first is to identify, the second to manage, the third to unleash potential, fourth accountability, fifth communicate, and sixth to take stock of what's going well and then repeat it. And we don't have time to do a deep dive into all 6 of these steps, but I am going to share with you 2 steps that help identify and manage your bias. It will start you on your journey. So We've talked a little bit about what is the big deal about bias. It can sabotage our clients, it can sabotage our success. We had the example of David. We'll have some more examples later when we talk about the impact of coaching. But right now, I want to share this. It's just a few minute video on what is unconscious bias that Google has produced, and I have permission to share. And Jennifer, will you let me know by telling me that you all can hear it and see it, please?
Yes, sure.
Okay, thank you.
What would the world look like
Yes,
if
we can see
everybody
it
were
and hear
aware
it.
of the
Okay.
stereotypes that they have and the biases that they have? When we talk about unconscious bias, we're basically saying our worldview can actually exert an influence beyond our conscious awareness, and it creates ambiguity.
You go to an engineer who's built something extremely innovative, and you say, who do you think your user is? This is where I have the most fun. My name is TV Raman, and I led our work on Android accessibility for 3 years. Write down everything that you think you know about your user with respect to abilities, inabilities, special abilities, disabilities. Almost every assumption that you write down on that whiteboard about this is the user I think I'm building for is questionable, because our various unconscious biases define the boundaries you're unwilling to expand.
These biases, they're the shortcuts that our brain has created so that we can deal with the information that we process every single day.
Right when we see anyone, whether we think about it or not, we are implicitly, automatically making judgments about how warm and competent that person or thing is.
All humans need to make decisions, and so we fill in the blanks because our brains are wired to do that, and we fill in with things we don't know with past experience. Oh, you pattern map to someone I think I should hire, so I'm going to hire you versus this person because they didn't map, because I can't fill in the blank because they don't look like me or they're not from my same background, and so I can't see how they're going to make the jump.
Every single person is great at things that you may not expect them to be, but it's really hard for us to see that when we're so powerfully guided by the things we expect to be true in the world.
I grew up surrounded with this conversation about what you can't do and what you won't be able to do. My name's Enrico, and I'm an autistic software engineer. The first time I go through the performance review process, I was asked for 5 strengths. It was the first time that I had ever been prompted to think in that way about myself, and it was really a life-changing moment for me.
When we are working in our day-to-day jobs, we are still making judgments about the people around us, about the resumes we see, about the employees that we're trying to decide, whether to put them on teams or not.
People are very wedded to the idea that they can perceive something objectively, and statistically they're wrong. But it's hard. You become attached to this idea that you can assess something by looking at it.
These subtle assumptions we make about people can have lasting effects on who we're promoting, who we're hiring, who we're putting in leadership positions. We have the responsibility to understand the assumptions that we make and understand the errors that we make. But it's not just for the collective good. If you take the time to understand more about this, there are things that you can implement for yourself that'll help you develop as a leader and to do your job even better.
It made me realize how often I have a very strong belief that is simply incorrect. When I look at one of these evaluation situations, the first question is, how can I eliminate the sources of potential bias and leave just the data so we can actually make better decisions?
If you're not conscious of the biases that you have, you're just not contributing at the level that you could, and you're not innovating at the level you could. And so your products won't be as good. Your results won't be as good.
When you think outside the box with respect to the assumptions you made about how somebody would use this wonderful thing you built, and when you sort of broaden that perspective as to who you change the world for, you build something even bigger.
I'm having trouble getting out of this and back to the Prezi.
What would the world look
Whoops.
like if everybody were aware?
Sorry.
It's okay. Do you want to?
Just a second.
Yeah.
There we go. Let's try that. Yep. All right. So let's hear some reactions to this video. One of the things they talked about was understanding bias can contribute to the collective good. And one of the reasons you became a coach like me was probably your desire to help build a world of harmony where each person and organization can live up to its full potential rather than be blocked by bias. And you saw some examples in this of the organization Google discovering some ways that they could be limiting potential in their organization. And we don't want to do that in our own businesses, our own coaching businesses. So my belief is we can all be part of the solution. And Google's reason for creating their bias training was because they were predominantly hiring white men, and the second group were men of Asian descent, and that very few women or other cultural groups. And they realized that that was getting in the way of their innovation and being able to be, the research shows that organizations that have more diversity, especially in their leadership and in their boards, do better financially. So what were some reactions that you all had to this video? Or some things that you noticed, reactions or takeaways?
Okay, Joey. I think I'm just kind of like agree with that. All of us have got bias, and all of us have got different. And somehow it does help us to function in a manner, yeah, so that things are processed faster at the mental level. So I guess this is something that we all can agree that we cannot perform. So, but of course, how can we be aware and be conscious of our biasness? But I guess the challenge is, as you put it here, it is an unconscious bias. So it means that, yeah, the challenge is how do we so-called surface our unconscious and subconscious stuff that's going on.
Very good. So recognizing we all have unconscious bias and that is in the unconscious. So how do we become more conscious so we can recognize it? And that's going to be part of our two-step process. So that's a good preview. Thank you. Thank you for your comments.
We have answers on the chat by Jess. It seems like bias is related to our perceptions and our view projections to others and situations, our inner perspective, our lens, and our preferences. And we also have Irene that mentions our brain has filters like representation system, meta programs, and values believed to perceive the info from external. And lastly, we have PJ that says, know your unconscious bias and improve your awareness that might help you to produce better and ecological results. So these are the chat responses.
Very, very well put. Thank you for your comments. And in the description for this program, I had the invitation to send in some examples of people that were working with leaders or organizations where they were recognizing bias either in the people that they worked with or coaching clients or in themselves. And I did receive some examples. And one was generational differences. And the person that submitted this, the coach said, for example, an older, more experienced leader is seen as not being open to new ideas, while a younger, less experienced leader who's doing very good work, but unknowingly offending others along the way. That was one example of what they were observing in the clients and organizations that they were working with. So let's move on to how does it work, and unconscious bias, is it good or bad? Well, bias, like I said, can be in favor of or against something. So it can be just as simple as I am in favor of the University of Kansas basketball team. That would be a bias that I'm aware of, so that would be a conscious bias. Or it could be that we see a car rushing towards us and our brain already has that slotted in the danger category, and so we know to jump out of the way because that's where our brain has slotted it. But when it becomes a problem is when we have different identities, cultural identities like young or old or a male or female. We'll get into more identities later, into categories of being bad or someone we want to avoid. And we heard in the video that we tend to feel more comfortable and choose someone who seems more like us rather than different than us. So the data is that our brains have 11 million bits of information coming in per moment, and it can only process 40 bits of information. So 11 million coming in, and we can only deal with 40 in a moment. So then it has to set up thousands of these automatic filtering systems. As one of you just mentioned, the filters. And everything else gets slotted into those categories. And that's what's happening out of our awareness in our unconscious. And how much time do you think we spend in our unconscious where we're out of awareness? We're just, some of you may drive home and don't even remember the drive home or the ride home on the subway. How much time do you think we spend there? Any guesses?
Maybe about 70% of the time.
About 70% of the time?
Yeah, and Irene say 93%, and PJ say 90%. And
Yes.
Angela say this is an interesting data. She would like to ask where's the source of the insight.
Yes, I have that in some of my blogs, the sources, and in my book. So on my website, you can download this exercise that we're going to do today and all of the different websites that I researched. Thanks, that's a good question. And the answer is more than 98% of the time. So several of you were very close. And this is from Judith Glasser. This is not information that she came up with. I have the source, but not in front of me. That judgment shuts down the brain in 0.07 seconds. So just like with that example with David at the beginning, my initial reaction was, oh my goodness, is this man going to be someone that I can coach if he believes other people are wrong and he is right? I had to watch my judgment, and his judgment, which had shut down his brain, was if people don't communicate the way I do, if they're indirect rather than direct, then they're wrong. And they need to be convinced they're wrong. And this is an approach that I recommend we use when we're exploring bias and cultural differences. And it's drawn from Janet Bennett's work. And I made up, just pulled the themes that I thought were most important from her work and from others that I've read. And the A is for awareness, the C, curiosity, which is easy for us as coaches, right? We're naturally curious and we want to promote awareness, and humility. So that first client, David, that I described, when you believe that you're right and everyone else is wrong, that's not a very humble approach, is it? So it's approaching our own bias and that of others with this idea, you know, I still, like a beginner's mind, I still have a lot to learn. And empathy is also a key factor in cultural and especially biased situations. And again, that's something I go into more in my blogs, which are free, or my book, but we don't have time to go much further because we're halfway through and we want to get to our 2-part exercise where you can start to identify and manage your bias. But first, let's look at how does bias impact coaching. And I have highlighted these coaching competencies as ones where I think particularly bias could affect our work with our clients. And so those are establishing trust, establishing the agreement, coaching presence, and direct communication. So do you all have any examples? I've been talking some about David. I shared that someone had written in that leaders that they had worked with were, the organizations they'd worked with had some bias about younger or older leaders. Anything coming up for you in terms of bias and how it can impact coaching?
What was your question again?
Yes. If you have any examples that you want to explore about how bias impacts coaching. Otherwise, I will start to share some more.
Okay, Julius texts on the chat and says that we tend to choose the client we are comfortable with to coach. Then that could be a bias in itself.
Yeah, thank you. And that's something that can limit our potential, the potential of our business and us as a person and as a coach. If we only, you know, we can choose a niche, but even within that niche, what happens when we have a reaction like I did, wondering, oh my goodness, this person believes they're right and everyone else is wrong, and am I going to be able to coach this person?
And we also have responded on the chat group that says, Sam say, I coach better with clients we like more. Mm-hmm. And we have Paramam, I hope I pronounced correctly, and he or she says, our body language will change during coaching if we bring our bias into the sessions.
Yes, thank you. You can see the body language in this image. That looks to be some confusion, uncertainty, maybe some anger. Yeah, so it does show up in our body language, and our clients can pick up on that and wonder, what's going on with my coach? And are they really with me and for me? Or can I trust them? Is this a safe place? when I mentioned David, this and the direct communication was actually, I didn't say, oh, you have a bias about these people. I asked him, do you think that you're more of a direct communicator or an indirect communicator? And he said, a direct communicator. I said, how about the people that you're working with? He said, they're indirect. I said, so what if we looked at, instead of right or wrong, direct and indirect, without attaching, the meaning of one group is right and one group is wrong. And that's where we went from there and made some progress, plus some humor. I took a risk and shared a statement that someone had shared with me, which is, would you rather be right or be in a relationship? And he laughed, and that was a good sign, I thought. Well, he can see that his goal doesn't match with this stance of right and wrong.
We have some response on the chat. Paramount continues saying that also it's important that we consciously practice keeping our mind open to elicit responses from clients. Bias will hamper that and thus affects the whole communication process. And we have Evelyn that mentioned that she has a client once who was unreliable, and I definitely has bias towards them because of it, and it makes it hard to move past in the coaching sessions. And Irene replied and says in the chat group as well, as bias are kind of limited belief. Can we just ask what do get this? I don't know what's it, or what do you know this bias? A bit, I don't get that part, Irene. Yeah, I'm just reading word for word what's on the chat group. Yes.
Okay, thank you. We were having some great comments.
Yes, and conversations happening. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, very very perceptive coaches on the webinar, and I think this is important even in establishing an agreement so that we're not making assumptions that may be tied to a bias. So I know, that I'm from the US, and when I was contracting with a Japanese company to provide coaching for their leaders who were based in Japan but also in other countries. And I said, so would you like for me to show up as my normal Western direct self, or would you like for me to adjust my communication to be less direct? And they said, oh no, we want you to be your normal direct self, because our leaders are working in other countries and with leaders in other countries, and they need to know how to handle different types of communication styles. But I knew that if I hadn't asked that question and I had just shown up as my usual Western direct communicating self, and that wasn't what they wanted, then I could unintentionally offend people. They might have the bias that, these direct Westerners are so rude and offensive. I don't want to work with them. Or if I had just automatically assumed that I should, alter my communication style, change my communication style, and be less direct, because that's what my understanding was of their culture, and then they would have been disappointed because that wasn't why they were hiring me, and they would be wondering, well, why isn't she doing the kind of coaching and communicating that we hired her for? So we really have to watch our bias and our assumptions, even when we are contracting and coming up with the coaching agreement. And I actually ask for some cultural information when I send out my welcome packet to new clients. And then I ask them, you know, what's the culture that we want to have together, and including if I were to say or do something unintentionally that offends you, how would you let me know that? Because that's not my intent. I don't want to do that. And I don't want miscommunication or bias to get in the way of our coaching relationship. So any further questions or comments in the chat, Jennifer?
Yes, there is a question from Jess that says, what is your view on relationship of bias and our self-regulation of our mood that we carried into the sessions? If you want to answer that before I go to the next comment.
Yes, that is a wonderful question. And so I think it is important to take some time to center, or a moment of meditation or prayer or mindfulness, which we're going to be practicing in a few minutes, before you go into a session. And actually, I also want to bring up that one of the things that can happen is we can have bias towards ourselves, or our clients may have bias towards themselves. So I don't know if you noticed in the Google video, there was a man who said, I'm an autistic engineer. And for the first time in my life, in my review, my boss asked me about my strengths. He said, no, you know, I'd always been told you can't do this, you won't be able to do that because you're autistic. And that's how he had seen himself. He had taken in these messages about his autism, and he had his own bias towards himself, towards the autism in himself that was holding him back from living out his full potential. And I've seen that before too. The messages that we grow up with, women in leadership believing they should stay in the background and not speak up. And then they come to me because their bosses told them they needed to be speaking up. They needed to learn to speak up and to get over that bias about women not speaking up. Thank you for that. And you said you had another one, Jennifer?
Yes, we have a lot on another one. Now, okay, so PJ just say, bias can impact every part of coaching, right from setting agreement to an end of a session. It is coach's responsibility to stay away from any bias that comes in the way for producing desired results for the clients. And we have Ivan that says, trust seems a foundations of coaching and even in a teamwork. Is trust a more of belief, or should be something to be achieved between coach and coachee from beginning? Is a trust can reduce bias? I think Ivan's question's something to do with trust. Would you want to answer that before I go on?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. Thank you. So yes, bias can impact trust. It can reduce trust or limit trust if the client perceives that we might have some type of a negative reaction or bias towards them. And then on the other hand, trust can be increased if we take responsibility for identifying and managing not only our own bias, but helping our clients to do that too.
Okay, so now we have, I think we have answered Ivan's questions. If Ivan, we have not answered your question, you just need to type it on the chat group again. So we have, I don't know what's her boy Toso. I think has to say just join in case I missed it. Often coachee bias can be projected in another limited belief, such as I do not have capacity required of me to achieve results expected from me. So I think this is a comment, and we have Paraman that agree with PJ's. I wonder if really possible to stay away from our bias, because all of us have some form of bias or another, and how do we work around it, stop it from affecting the sessions of our clients?
That's beautiful. Thank you. I think that's a good lead in, unless there's anything else there, to our two-step process. So just like we'll never learn everything there is about coaching, right? I've been a master certified coach since 2005, and I'm still learning. And that's the same with bias is, yes, you know, we have those thousands of filtering systems in our brain, so they will continue to pop up. And what's important is we learn how to identify and manage them so that they don't get in our way. They'll still be there. We'll still be finding new ones, but we can learn to identify and manage them. How about that? All right, so we've talked about being flooded with information, these 10 million bits of information coming in per moment. Our brains can only process 40. It's part of living in this VUCA world, right? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And it happens on a global level, a systems level, like the team or the organization, and on an individual level. So how do we access our conscious when we're so flooded and we're spending so much time in our unconscious? So I am going to invite you, this is the first pause, the first step of the I and the M, the identifying and managing bias. We won't be able to have time today to get into the accountability and communication so much, but we're starting with identifying and managing. So centering, this is something I learned from Doug Silsby, who just died, unfortunately. He has a book, Presence-Based Coaching, and I went through his training. And he says that when we are centered, we are alert, connected, present, and it's a practice where we shift to being creative, resourceful, fully present, focused, and ready for whatever is next. So as coaches, we're taught to see our clients as creative, resourceful, and whole. We want to be that way as coaches too. And so here's a way to step into that before we go into a coaching session. And I actually use this with clients too. So the invitation is to sit or stand, and I like to stand. So, and to close your eyes and to begin breathing deeply and diaphragmatically. And while you continue to breathe that way, to experience your feet firmly planted on the ground. If you're seated, to experience your bottom firmly planted in the chair. And just take a moment to experience that centered place. And then I invite you to shift your body slightly to the left. Experience that space, come back to center. Shift your body slightly to the right. Experience that space, come back to center. Shift your body slightly forward. Experience that space, come back to center. And as you shift your body slightly back, I invite you to imagine a great big fat dinosaur tail extending from the back of your body. The tail is in firm contact with the ground, and within that tail is a representation of all of your gifts and experiences that have brought you to this place in your life and will be with you as you move forward. So I invite you to come back to center, experience that space, open your eyes. If you want to sit down, you can. And do we have one or two reactions to that exercise, Jennifer?
I think they are just still centering back.
Okay.
Hi, Marilyn. This is Sam. Thank you for the exercise.
Yeah.
I giggled when you talk about the dinosaur tail, and then my response to it was, I'm supported with all my gifts, and I am strong even when I'm not. And so it was very good. Thank you. I needed that in that moment.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So now that we're centered, we've moved from the unconscious into our conscious. And now I invite you to think of one of your clients, and we'll look at them from this lens, a bias lens. So do you have a client in mind? Maybe someone you're just starting to work with, or someone you've been working with, but you notice sometimes you feel a little irritated or frustrated with them. So when you think about this client, think about what religion they are, their sexual orientation, their gender, their region, their ethnicity, their political views, their age, how they dress, whether they're a native speaker or not, etc., etc. These are all different cultural identities. And do a check-in with yourself. What do I think I know about my client just based on these different cultural identities? And then how could my assumptions that I'm making based on these different cultural identities, the assumptions, get in the way of our coaching? And the third question is, what assumptions or bias do I need to update? So you've moved from the unconscious to the conscious, and you have something to help you look at what are all the different cultural identities that this person holds, because we all have multiple cultural identities. And what do I think I know about them based on this? How might that get in the way, and what do I need to update? What do I need to, how do I need to manage my bias? So anyone have a question or comment? I know we just have a few minutes left about this exercise.
There was some comments that I was unable to read just now. With my work in gender, I learned that recognizing our own bias is the first step to overcoming it. So it becomes a continuous learning process and can happen only if we manage to keep our mind open and be receptive. And also Sam mentions that when our values are challenged by our clients, bias can take over and impacting our ability to coach.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Hi, Marilyn. Joe here. I'm just curious. So, I mean, your conclusion is basically more or less that biasness should be managed and can be managed. So I'm just wondering if somebody is I guess over time, with much training and development, becomes less and less of biasness in their lives or in them as a person. How would this person look like, and how would you experience such a person differently?
Your voice is kind of going in and out, so I wasn't sure about the final question. How would I experience a person?
How would you experience such a person differently? I mean, if let's say, assuming we practice, we manage our bias, and over time develop ourselves as coaches, as human beings. So if somebody were to have less of such biasness, how will this person look like?
I think someone that's continually to check in with themselves around this. And I have many different ways of doing that. Besides this is one way. So there are multiple ways to learn to identify and manage. And just making that a part of your daily practice, just like you might have some for discussion, maybe a little role play or sample coaching around this. What would you like to do with this remaining half hour?
We have some comment on the chat. I'm not too sure whether you have heard it. It says, thank you for sharing about bias with us. As a takeaway, as a coach, we can continually work to develop our coaching presence and stay in the space to be of service to our clients.
Beautiful. That's lovely.
And so I'm not going to read some of those. Thank you, Jess, for giving me your mobile number. So I got your number from our members here, so I can call you just now for which. So your number is on the chat group, and yes, and are the exercise completed? Jess was asking, is there any exercise that was not able to share with us before the breakdown happened?
Well, I don't know what time the breakdown happened. All of a sudden, I couldn't hear anything. And when I looked at Zoom, you weren't there. So I closed out of my screens. Like I said, when I'm doing the Prezi, I can't see you or the chat. So I don't know when we disconnected.
So I think we got disconnected. Okay, it's okay. We can always start from centering. Jess was saying we were after the centering, yes.
Okay, but you did see the circle with the different cultural identities, or no?
Yes, so I think we saw the last one was the different type of biasness slide. That was the last slide.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let me, I closed out of everything, so let me pull that back up. And so all I'm seeing now is the one comment in the chat. So when I signed back in, everything else was deleted, evidently.
Yes. Culture identity. We were at pause second questions.
Oh, on the second question. I don't know what happened, but I'm pulling it back up. And I'll share my screen and then we'll get back in. Technology is great when it works, right? Okay, so.
And when it don't work, it's pain in the ass. That is a biasness.
That's a bias towards technology, right? That's great. Okay. All right.
Is this a link that we can get this PowerPoint presentations?
It's not a PowerPoint, it's a Prezi.
Yeah,
No,
it looks
really,
very cool. We are here, we are at this slide, yes.
yeah, okay. So the invitation was to think about one of your clients and ask yourself, what do I think I know about them based on their cultural identities? So we had the examples of direct, indirect communicator. We'd had the example of young and old, that sometimes older people are seen as more set in their ways, we say in the US, so not as open to change. And sometimes younger people are viewed as, they may be doing a really good job, but not aware of how they are offending people along the way. And then I also had someone write in and say, let's see if I can find that they had recognized their own bias towards weight, how heavy someone was, that they were drawing unfair conclusions about people who are large or heavyweight and what that means about who they are as leaders. And, and also that in positions of leadership, so this is a coach who works with leaders, and they assume that when they're working with a leader, that leader wants to learn and to continue and grow and evolve. And that's their bias, is that leaders should want to do those things. So if they get a client who doesn't want to do those things, then they're back where David was, of thinking that person is wrong because they're not wanting to learn or grow. So those are some examples. And an example that I had of a bias growing up was in the US. We were very afraid of Russians when I was a child. That the Soviet Union, that was when it was still the Soviet Union, that they were going to try and take us over and convert us all to communism. And if we didn't agree to that, we were going to die. And so that was really scary. And then a few years ago, I was invited to help with a coach training program of 25 Russian-speaking coaches and in Bali. And thankfully, I had already identified and learned to manage my bias towards Russians, because if I had not, it would have been challenging to establish the trust needed for a successful coach training. And they would have been picking up on my my bias against them, just as we mentioned before, through their body language and that sense of things. So how could my assumptions get in the way? Yeah, it gets in the way of trust and presence, and limits our potential, for the potential that we have as coach and client to work together and to reach goals. And so, what assumptions or bias do I need to update? So who's got, from doing this example now, who has an example that they want to share, or something that they're taking away from doing this exercise?
This is Sam. I had a client who was who interestingly wanted coaching but refused to do anything. So for the first 2 sessions, it was really hard because she's like, I know what to do, or I don't know what to do, so I'm not going to do it. you know, and even when you try to ask questions, they refuse to respond or at least open up a little bit, you know. That was hard to work through because my bias was that she didn't really want it, and she, you know, I don't know why she's here, you know. And then on the third session, she walked in, she was a different person, she wore different clothes, she looked different. It was very interesting. And the first thing out of her mouth, other than "Hi, Sam," was, "I don't know what you did to me." That I did this and that and everything, and I don't know what you did to me. And we had a really great connection on only at the third session. So if I had given up and I continued to have that bias, I was struggling in the first two sessions, but I tried my best to keep thinking she'll be able to do this, she'll be able to do this. And on the third session, that was what I got. So it was interesting how, you know, my bias kind of help and not help, but being aware of it was very important in that instance. It was very interesting. Yeah.
That's a fabulous success story. So you were really the hero of that story.
For her, yes. Yeah. For me, I was like, okay, there's so much more like that I need to work on myself as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, congratulations for your identifying that and managing it. And how that you managed it is you continued to try and see her. You had this, what is she doing here? Thought on the one hand, on the other hand, you kept telling yourself she can do it. She's creative, she's resourceful, she can do it.
It was hard, I must say. It was hard. At the third session, I literally dragged my feet in, I'll be honest. I mean, we're all about vulnerability here, and I'll be honest, I was a coach, I was truly, you know, not bringing my A game on the third session, but the moment she said that, it changed.
Yes.
So
yes. Thank you for sharing that. And I love, you know, I'm now completing my training in coaching supervision and being supervised and providing supervision. And that's one of those places where you can say, this is how I felt with this client. I really felt frustrated or, you know, like wondering why are they even coming to coaching? And you can talk through what's going on the inside, including the biases that get triggered. So mentor coaching is more looking at the 11 competencies, and supervision is how the internal is impacting what's going on inside us, is impacting the coaching, and a place to reflect. Thank you. That's beautiful. Anyone else a takeaway from this exercise or an example? Well, my takeaway question for you.
Before that, we have one comment by Angela. Is there any possibility to leverage on the bias to positively impact the coaching experience or outcome?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Is there any possibility to leverage on the bias to positively impact the coaching experience or outcome?
Okay, thank you. I think for me, when bias has been successfully leveraged in the coaching is when I can help the client identify their bias and how it's been limiting them and how they can manage it so it's no longer limiting their potential and their potential is unleashed. So one example was, have been actually several women who had been raised with the idea that women were kind of in the background and should not be speaking up. And they were moving up the career ladder, and their bosses were saying, you know, you're in a higher position of authority. We want to move you up even further. you have to learn to speak up in the meetings in order to do that. And so when I asked them about their culture, this bias about women not speaking up had shown up, and that was one of the key things that we accomplished in the coaching, was how they could move past that that cultural bias upbringing that women should stay in the background and not speak up, so that they could be successful, because that's what they wanted and that's what the organization wanted. So that's one example. And then I had a male client who, like the autistic worker in the Google video, he said he'd grown up with the idea as someone with autism that people were always telling him, you can't do this, you can't do that. And when he was called in for his first review in the company, they said, talk with us about your strengths. What do you see as your key strengths? And that was the first time anyone had ever talked with him about his strengths. Well, we know that's something that we do as coaches. And this particular client, I was called in to coach him because his 360-degree assessment, how he saw himself did not match how everyone else in the organization saw him. They saw him as, really contributing a lot, and he still had this belief about himself because of a disability that he had growing up, that people wouldn't want to hear what he had to say. And so because he'd had this learning disability, and so he had to overcome that because he'd been embarrassed about it growing up, and that was the bias that he picked up. If I speak, people don't want to hear what I have to say. That wasn't true anymore. So he had to update this bias. And, if you had asked him, do you believe that people with learning disabilities don't have anything worthwhile to listen to? He would have said, of course not. That's not right. But somehow he had applied that to himself. And so the coaching was updating his own self-image, his own bias towards himself. It's a great question. Thank you. So I'm going to, do we have any other questions or comments right now, Jennifer?
We have one that is with me on my side that says bias on technology.
Oh,
yes.
Yes.
And she was the one that rescues for me. Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think you can continue. Yeah.
Okay. So really what I want to leave you with is an inquiry. How an inquiry is not something that you answer right away, but something you think about between coaching sessions. How will you increase your impact and become part of the solution so you, your clients, and their organizations can unleash their potential? And I talked about in the beginning, we wouldn't have time to go through all 6 steps of the impact, but it's on my website free. You can go, there's a blog series here, the Impact Bias 7 blog series. I'm continuing to address that right now in a video blog every week. I mentioned supervision, mentor coaching, the Breaking Free from Bias book. And on that book page, there are some additional free resources, including that circle exercise that we just did. That's the freebie for signing up for my newsletter or for the book list. So I invite you, I want to help as much as I can to serve in this area. Consider me and my programs and resources for you. And I'm going to go to the bigger screen just to see the journey that we've gone through today from being flooded with all this information, learning about what bias is, how it impacts our coaching, 2 steps we can take to start to look at identifying and managing our bias and our clients' bias. And just remembering you can be part of the solution. And I love the image on my book of like one person inviting the other in, come and join my world, and where you can unleash all of your potential rather than staying on the outside and being limited. So any other questions or comments now, as we've looked at where we've come this evening? Or intentions. Maybe you're going to take that extra minute to center before you start a session, or that might be something that you use in a session, or the cultural identity part, something that you might use before you start working with a new client, or even with your clients to help them identify biases that might be getting in their way. Who's got a plan, a commitment, an intention?
I think you can now unmute yourself and just talk instead of putting it onto the chat. So we have about like last 5 minutes. Any intentions?
And maybe I'll exit.
I have one questions. What if there is resistance to shift bias from clients?
Well, yes, because some of them have been there since a very early age. And even if they want to change it, it can take a while. Just like when we have a goal, let's say we want to be a triathlete, that takes a lot of retraining maybe of our body. And so our brain is similar, that it might take some time and some new training and some patience to achieve our goal.
And we have Angela that mentions questions. Any guidance to differentiate a bias from true issues? I'm not too sure what that's in.
Yeah, I would have to know more about what she means by that.
Angela, are you?
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi. What I was curious to know is, we talked on the assumption that it is about bias that's either impacting the experience from the coach or the coachee's perspective. However, how do we know that it is a true challenge and not an excuse that it could be a bias?
Okay. All right. I love that. Thank you, Angela, because this has been a problem in some of the early bias awareness trainings, is people have heard the message, okay, everyone has unconscious bias. So check, it's off my list. We all have it. I don't have to worry about it or think about it. And they don't. So yes, it's good to know we all have unconscious bias. And then in order for it to, for us to unleash that potential and not be limited by the bias, then we have to be continually looking at, where is my bias showing up? Where is your bias showing up? And how can we manage that? Yeah, it can be just an excuse of, okay, yeah, we have biases, everybody does, so I don't have to worry about it. Is that helpful, Angela?
Yes, thank you.
I think for myself, I think what I get out from today's session is this reminder that I always say: with awareness come choices. And when I'm aware, then it gives me choices to respond what kind in any situation that I have. So yeah, that's my takeaway for today. A very good reminder again. Okay, so we have Ivan that just comment on the chat. So we should manage bias rather than avoid bias. Is that's his question.
It's impossible, Ivan, to avoid bias because as you heard in the video and the research is that we have all this information, all this data coming in, our brain can't deal with it all at one time. So things just get slotted into categories. You know, this type of person is dangerous, this type of person I'm going to like, this kind of person I'm not going to like. You know, someone who is old is too conservative, someone who's young is too brash. You know, our brains just have these thoughts. And so you have a choice of then increasing your awareness about it, like Jennifer has said, learning to identify what they are and to make a shift, just like we help our clients make shifts. So we can make shifts and we can help them make shifts and see things differently. Change the slot.
Change the slot. Put one pigeonhole to another pigeonhole.
Or open it up. Let the pigeon out.
Yeah, open it out. Okay. Can we have like maybe one last questions or comment before we officially on today's webinar? I invite anyone.
Well, just hearing all this bias and stuff, I realized that we are very good at catching other people's biases. Perhaps we can invite some of our closer friends and people that know us well to catch our bias. And I think more importantly, we have to train ourselves through mindfulness or whatever to catch our own biases. Mm-hmm. And I realized that through the coaching training, it does have some techniques to, you know, in terms of raising awareness, is also to catch ourselves with biases and how to really bring a clean state every time we talk to a new client or anyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Just a clean state.
Yeah, so that accountability, that's part of the impact. That's the A, and having accountability partners does help. And then C is communicating when we hear bias statements, you know, within an organization or with our client. What do we do about that? How might we communicate? And yeah.
So that's where the ICF training and all those things differentiate us from people who have not been trained. The biases will start coming in more versus with more awareness. As a trained coach, we should limit that type of bias coming into any coaching relationship.
Yeah, I think it'd be a great thing for all of the coach training programs to include. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
So again, you know, I'm just asking you, how will you increase your impact and become part of the solution so that you can be unleashing potential? And I've got free resources and then my book and other programs available to you. I hope we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn, and thank you for everybody, and thank you for embracing the breakdown as well. And we're going to have another webinar at 12 to 1, titled Road to Credential. So do take a break for a while and join back in if you have bought the week pass, and I'll see you. And thank you, Marilyn. Thank you.